Cool. Well, I'm super excited to be here. My first time in Vienna, having fun. Ate at a restaurant yesterday, exploring some of the city. But today I'm here to talk about exciting things. So one thing that I just want to ask is, how many of you all have suffered from JavaScript fatigue? Raise of hands. I need to see more hands than that because I know that's not true. So every day on Twitter, it's like, replacing Redux with the new React Context API, introducing Urkel, a universal React query library. Bazel's going to be the new Webpack. Now you can write, native mobile apps with Vue.js and NativeScript. I feel like technology is hard, right? One day it's flirting with you on Twitter and you're getting excited about it, and then the next day it's left you and it's on to something else. So, sad, but this is why I decided to sort of drink my own flavor of Kool-Aid and focus on reactive programming. I felt like it was a really good career move for me, and it sort of decreases the amount of JavaScript fatigue that I have to go through on an ongoing basis. So how many of y'all have heard of reactive programming? Hopefully a few of you. Okay, yes. I thought it was like the coolest thing what's reactive programming? Let's do that. I want to learn that. How many of y'all practice reactive programming? Few of y'all in the audience. Okay, great. Yeah. So my name's Tracey. You can follow me on Twitter @LadyLeet. I'm always happy to help out if you like on whatever you're doing. I'm co-founder of a company called This.media and This.labs, where we do a lot of stuff related to state of JavaScript, bringing the JavaScript ecosystem together. And on the lab side, we do a lot of stuff like pairing as a service, or developer relations as a service, or open source support contracts if you're having issues, getting those PRs in. Google Developer Expert as well for the web and Angular. I do community relations for the Node Foundation. I'm on the RxJS core team. I lead the learning team. I love JavaScript, so if it's JavaScript, I've probably played with it. And I do a lot of things for the community, right? Whether it's being a Women Tech Makers lead, or Google Developer Group organizer, or hosting the Modern Web podcast. So probably do a little too much, huh? I have my own fatigue. So I'm here, though, to talk about reactive programming today. And reactive programming is all around us. A lot of you who maybe didn't raise your hands might actually be programming reactively and not even realize it. So one of the reasons I wanted to give this talk is because I'm surrounded by people who talk about reactive programming on a daily basis, and I really wanted to be able to explain it to everybody in a way that anybody can just sort of like understand and digest and realize the importance of reactive programming in your everyday lives. So let's go ahead and demystify it a little bit. Just a side note, the ideas around reactive programming can actually be very subjective. So this talk is really not to be like that prescriptive. It's more to have light bulbs go off in your head to say like, oh, I didn't realize that this was actually reactive programming or reactive programming paradigms. If you look at Wikipedia, there's quite a long definition on Wikipedia, and we'll go through it together. So it's reactive programming is a programming paradigm concerned with data streams and the propagation of change. This means that it becomes possible to express static or dynamic data with ease via the employed programming language, and that an inferred dependency with the associated execution model exists, which facilitates the automatic propagation of change involved with data flow. So in layman's terms, what that actually means is basically reactive programming is dealing with sets of events over a period of time by the automatic propagation of change. Most importantly, you're implicitly, not explicitly propagating your data, and each step within your application doesn't know or care about what the previous step was. It just wants to perform an action to any of the inputs that are actually coming in. So if you look at Excel, for example, right, you have the inputs A, B, and C, and D basically concatenates A, B, and C, but D doesn't actually care about what the inputs are, right? You can change B to reactive, and you get I love reactive programming, because, like, again, it's implicitly, not explicitly propagating the data in D. So I'm going to talk about a few things today. We're going to talk about reactive programming in different standards, frameworks, and libraries, how and why to utilize reactive programming, but most importantly, like how to think reactively, and then reactive programming using RxJS. So going first into standards, so over the past few years, we've seen standards bodies like WhatWig, TC39, and began to sort of like consider and adopt reactive programming paradigms. So you have promises and observable in TC39. In WhatWig, you have the event target observable proposal as well. And then in different frameworks, not just these that I'm going to list out, but in Vue, D3, React, and Angular, you sort of see these paradigms happening. Now, first things first, let's look at TC39, the promises spec. So this was introduced to browsers in about 2014, and it was part of the official ECMAScript 2015 spec. So a lot of people don't think that this is reactive programming because, well, for many reasons, I'll go into those in a second, but the reason why they are is because you can process a value asynchronously and in steps through then blocks. So over here, I'm using the fetch API to fetch a JSON file, and then I'm chaining together promises to parse a JSON file into a JavaScript object, and then I'm just console logging to signal that I've completed parsing, and then I have fruit snacks, right? So again, a lot of people don't realize that this is actually reactive because a lot of the code you write to interact with promises isn't reactive. But anyways, that's a good one. That's usually an aha moment for people. Observable proposal, of course. This was introduced April 30th, 2015, currently at stage 1. It would add observable as a primitive, just like promises were added. This is also the most popular and well-known reactive programming paradigm. About 8 million monthly downloads of RxJS and growing. This is between RxJS 4 and RxJS 5 and up, currently at 6. RxJS 6 is actually a reference implementation to the TC39 observable proposal as well. And you can look at it on GitHub and comment on the GitHub TC39 if you're interested. Now, WhatWig event target observable proposal is something that is pretty new. It was just introduced in December, last December, by Banlash on behalf of Google. And what this does is it adds a method called on to event target. So basically, if you call the on method with an event type as the argument, it's going to give you back an observable of those events. So I can use this on a button, for example, use the on method, and then this is going to give me back an observable of click events. This proposal also comes with a few different operators like map, for filter, first, and take until. So you can look at the GitHub issue number 544 on WhatWig if, again, you care about this and comment on it to get people more excited about it. Now, let's explore reactive programming paradigms that we see in different frameworks and libraries as well. One thing to note, actually, and this was something that was sort of an aha moment for me when I got really excited about reactive programming, is that reactive is just a fancy term for everything we all do, right? Like, no one invented it. We've just given it a name for the pattern of declaratively reacting to the propagation of change, right? It's just a term to quantify a way of programming. D3 is a great example of this being reactive, but not really intentional. So if you look at this code, for example, sorry if you can't see it, but it's very declarative, and the declarative nature of it doesn't actually make it reactive. It's reactive because you're reacting to the propagation of change, right? So you're changing a value's location or the way it looks, but you're not explicitly doing so on every single event. You're just describing what you want to happen, and then it just happens under the hood. React is another great example. So if you look at React set state, calling set state in React, what it does is it triggers a re-render of that component and potentially its children. And so a lot of people say, like, no, this is not true because it's pull-based, but that's actually a common misconception. Reactive programming does not have to be pull-based. It can actually also be push-based. So if you look at, again, how set state sort of propagates change, the idea of it is technically in itself reactive. Redux observable as well. This uses RxJS to declaratively handle your business logic and side effects when you're using Redux. And then MobX is actually probably the most reactive example on here. It makes your React basically full-blown reactive programming. So with MobX, your state basically becomes this one giant reactive model. And this, again, is a really great example of something being pull-based, but also reactive. So to be clear, what happens is, like, you push a notification at you, and then you need to pull the values out to actually calculate the value. So Angular is another great example. So Angular is probably one of the frameworks or libraries that has fully embraced reactive programming because RxJS is a first-class citizen in Angular. So you have a lot of amazing things that RxJS and reactive programming enable. For example, the on-push change detection strategy, when you enable this, it really provides a more efficient and performant data flow because it'll push changes at you versus detecting changes. NGRX, of course, this is basically the Redux pattern that's re-implemented in RxJS. Angular routers, you can go ahead and get observables of various events around activated routes. So example, you can get an observable of changes to route parameters or query parameters, and then forms as well. So all validation events are reactive, and this allows the asynchronous and synchronous validation to blend together really nicely. So just a few different examples of how Angular maximizes the idea of reactive programming. Vue as well, so Vue.js watchers help you transition state. This is Sarah Drasner's example of how watchers are super awesome. You can't see the animations change that much right here, but it's pretty cool. And also, the other thing is there is a Vue Rx library as well that you can check out so that you can use RxJS in Vue if you like. So we typically see these reactive programming patterns in cases where it's a very natural fit for events to be modeled as values over time. So great examples of this would be WebSockets, user events, whether it's voice to text, keyboard events, etc., animations, or HTTP. So that might excite you guys and everything like that, or at least you guys get an idea of sort of where you see it in our ecosystem. But then the real question is, okay, how do I actually start thinking reactively, right? Because you really have to change your mindset a little bit to maximize the benefits of reactive programming. So we're going to talk about how and why to utilize it, and again, what it means to think reactively. So if you think about reactive programming, and what you first need to do is you need to basically think that everything can be modeled as an event, right? And also that all web apps are actually event-driven. And everything can be represented as a set of values over time, even events. So this is one of the biggest hurdles, this idea that everything can be represented as a set of values over time, even events. So first things first, just defining a set. I mean set in the math sense. And the current mindset usually is that when an action happens, you get one value back, right? But the new mindset should be if you treat events as a set of values, right, then you're thinking reactively. So example sets, an empty set is a set, 0 is a set, and then of course 1, 2, 3 could be a set. Now, if everything is represented as a set of values over time within your application, then you can do so much more with your data. You can query it, you can map it, you can filter it, you can join and combine it in different ways, which is awesome, or you can give something half a set of things, right? Or give something a set with a set of parameters. So hopefully that helps you, again, start thinking okay, this is how I can start thinking reactively and figure out why I should use reactive programming. But then the next question is probably, okay, how do we actually implement reactive programming, right? So of course, being on the RxJS core team, I'm going to talk about reactive programming using RxJS. So let's go ahead and get into that really quickly. So first things first, what is RxJS? So this is actually a domain-specific language that sits on top of JavaScript for reacting to events. It's also the most popular reactive programming library, so I mean, you can't go that wrong. Basically, if you use something like RxJS, you can maximize the value of reactive programming by Rxing all the things, which people love to do. Once they get it, they're like, how do I make my entire application use this? So I'm going to walk through a few different code examples so you all can get an idea of what I mean. And each of these, I'm going to specify what framework or library I use to create these examples. But what you'll actually see is that I use very little framework code. There's very little framework code that I actually have to write, and this is kind of the beauty of using something that sits on top of JavaScript. So the first example I'm going to do is creating a simple drag and drop in React using RxJS. And the point I want to create here is that the idea that RxJS allows you to really easily create complex interactions with very, very few lines of code. So this is my entire drag and drop example. And again, with very few lines, I'm able to implement something pretty difficult. So let's step through the code a little bit. So the first things first, what I'm doing here is I'm creating a few different observables. So mouse up, mouse down, mouse move, right? And then what I'm doing is I'm creating a specific observable targeting the mouse down specifically on an element with a little food emoji on it, so a little class. And then what I'm doing is I'm saying, okay, based on those elements, if I'm clicking those, then any one of those, I'm going to make those be draggable, right? And then what I'm doing is I'm saying, okay, this is draggable until I have a mouse up event. And then after I have a mouse up event, then it stops dragging. And then, of course, I'm going ahead and subscribing to it, and then I'm unsubscribing later on when the component unmounts. So this is what my JSX looks like, just in case you care. It's just image elements, and then adding the class with the little food emoji. I don't know what to call it, a plate emoji, whatever it is. But let's look at this actually in my application. So this is my app. This is a game where I'm trying to guess what Grumpy Cat likes to eat and feed her only the things that she likes. So if I guess right 3 times, then I win, and if I don't, then she wins. So here's the drag and drop in action, right? So I can basically drag a hot dog. She doesn't like hot dogs. She likes pizza. She likes French fries, right? But anyways, easy, simple drag and drop. The other 2 things I'm going to talk about are this little search bar right here, which I'll create a little look-ahead search for. And then obviously we haven't talked about the scoreboard and how that works yet. But so the second example, we're going to build on top of the application that I'm building. And all I did was basically take the same application and mainly copy-paste all my RxJS code from a React app into an Angular application. So this example uses Angular and RxJS. And the point here I want to make is that it's super easy to add in inputs and chain them together with very little factoring using RxJS. And I think this is actually, it'll probably illustrate a good example of the idea of future-proofing. So if you have an abstraction, it makes it really easy to, again, change or add inputs into your application. And all the code you see, right, you should see that it's just very intrinsically declarative and super easy to reason about. So before, you saw my little application before, and what I was able to do was I dragged it, and then the scoreboard updated, right? But what if I wanted to use that little search bar and do a little bit of a look-ahead search? I'm going to go ahead and do that here. Initially what I'm doing is I'm creating 2 observables. I'm creating cat food via drag, and then cat food via search, right? And then what I'm doing is I'm filtering based on if it's been in the bowl. Like if it's put in the bowl, then the scoreboard updates if I'm dragging and dropping. And then I'm filtering only based on what Grumpy Cat likes to eat. So Grumpy Cat only likes to eat pizza, French fries, donuts, and tacos. And then I created a little .NET Web API. So I'm basically filtering based on the responses back from that little API that I created. Okay, so then what I'm doing is I'm taking those 2, I'm taking the cat food via drags and cat food via search, these 2 observables, and then I'm going ahead and updating the counter by creating another observable and just merging those 2 observables together. And then I'm saying if either of these are true, then I'm using an operator called scan, which is just an accumulator, to increment the count by 1. So you can see that here. So basically, I can type in hot dog, right? And that will feed Grumpy Cat. Grumpy Cat doesn't like hot dogs. I can feed Grumpy Cat there, and it'll update, right? And if I do that 3 times, then I lose the game and the cat won. So giving you an idea of, again, how easy that is. So again, I want to go over this code really quickly again, right? So you can add, again, different inputs, like cat food via drag. You can do the cat food via search, and then you're just merging everything together. So this is really great because imagine as we progress into technology, if I need, mobile inputs, or I need AR inputs or VR inputs and things like that, right? You really don't have to write that much code to be able to, if you're doing everything in RxJS, to be able to make your code work. I wanted to share another example. So this is another example in Angular and RxJS. And this is from a look-ahead search application that I created. And what I'm doing here is I'm taking 3 different inputs. I'm using the Google Vision API, which is right here. I'm using the Web Speech API, which is right here. And then I'm using a little look-ahead search right here, right? And again, I'm taking all those inputs. So what this application does is it gets all the different keywords and then goes to my server, which has like a bunch of different puns, and based on those keywords, it's going to return back, like if I want banana puns, it's going to return back a set of banana puns based on my keyword searches. So with this, again, I can have as many inputs and as many things that give me keywords as possible, and then I'm just merging them all together, boom, done, and then I can go to my server and with one keywords observable, search and get back a set of puns. So I love this because, again, like, I was able to basically add in, I could take a picture of a banana, for example, and I will get back a set of banana puns. I can tell my computer, hey, give me banana puns, it'll give me banana puns, or I can just type and search, and it'll give me banana puns as well. So another thing is creating observables is super easy. So this is actually the most basic way to create observables. And I'll show you how that's implemented in the code I just showed you. But this is the most basic way to do it, right? You use the observable constructor. So in the RxJS library, there's a lot of different observable creation methods, but underneath the hood, you can just use the observable constructor. What you're seeing here is that we're creating a new observable, then we're giving it a function that gives us an observer when we subscribe to the observable, and then the observer has the methods next, error, and complete on them so that you can emit values from your observable. Now, this is actually a great example of just like wrapping something, because if everything's the same shape, right? Basically, like if you create in your application everything to be the same shape, then you can just like play with things. So everything I've created is, an observable of like, let's say, an observable of array of strings or something like that. Then I can play with my data much easier. So I'm wrapping the web speech API here, and all I'm doing again is using the observable constructor right here. I'm wrapping the web speech API, and then I'm doing a little bit of error handling and cleaning things up by removing the event listeners when the observable completes. But after I do that, then again, this is an input, and I can just stick that back in my code. And over here, I can say like, okay, I'm creating an observable called spoken keywords using this wrapped observable I created. I can just stick it in this list of things, merge everything together, and then boom, again, I can just find some puns that I want, right? So hopefully that helped you guys understand a little bit what it means to use RxJS and how you can use it in your applications. But again, the other thing that I love about using something that sits on top of JavaScript, right, is that you're no longer dependent on any framework or library's code, right? We all deal with JavaScript fatigue, and if 95% of my code can be just shared across different frameworks or libraries, it's kind of awesome. So I would say that probably to refactor each one of these, it took me like about 30 minutes to recreate the same application in different frameworks, Angular, React, and Vue. So yeah, that's super awesome, and I love that idea. There's also other dialects. So RxJava, PHP, .NET, and Ruby are just examples of different dialects. But I think this is super awesome because you can work with your backend teams a little bit easier if you all understand like Rx something, right? And I think for backend developers as well who use something like, let's say, Rx.NET, as they go in and maybe they're using NGRX with Angular or RxJS in general, they sort of, it feels more familiar to them. So we talked about a few things today. Reactive programming, where you see it in standards, frameworks, and libraries, how and why to utilize it, and obviously like using it with RxJS. Few key takeaways. So number one is like the whole idea that the reactive programming paradigms have appeared over the past few years in the different standards, frameworks, and libraries. And the whole idea that like nobody invented reactive programming, it's just a name for the pattern of declaratively reacting to the propagation of change. And then to think reactively, right, you really need to think of everything modeled as a set of values over time, even events. And with an abstraction like RxJS, you can do a lot of really useful things in your code with less code and little refactoring over time. You also don't need to Rx all the things, right? I did say that, but you can just dip your toe in. So use it for things that are really applicable to you and start slowly adding it to your code base, like click handlers. If you use it for AJAX requests, it really helps with easy cancellation, anything asynchronous, or you can just call subscribe and do your normal imperative code as well. That's completely fine. I think that, whenever you're learning something or wanting to get involved in the community, the more involved you are, the easier it is to learn something. So I lead the RxJS docs initiative. I do not love the docs, so it really inspired me to fix the docs. So this is actually, it's just actually an Angular application, which is awesome. So it's very easy to contribute. Y'all can get involved. We'd love contributions. And in order to get involved, there's a repo, github.com/reactivex/rxjs-docs. Check out the different issues or join our Slack. You can just email me or tweet me at Lady Lee. I'm super happy to get you all involved, especially for first-time contributors. And also, this is the importance. I wouldn't have been able to learn RxJS without the help of mentors, right? So with this .labs, we have a lot of amazing mentors who are core contributors, and they help probably with like higher level architect things rather than just debugging my code, although they help me with that too. So check out this .labs for that. But also I had really amazing talk mentors like Jay Phelps, Ben Lesh, who were both on the core team, and Ashwin, Dimitri, and Al. So thank you to my talk mentors for this. And again, stay in touch if you need anything or if you're excited about RxJS or Angular or Women in Tech, whatever it is, feel free to find me at Lady Lee and come say hi. Thank you.
Awesome. Tracy Lee.